Well, good evening, everyone. Give you a minute to catch your breath after that magnificent ending. Let me first just add my name to my colleague, Leila, and others, welcoming you back to Colombia.
Thank you.
It's a privilege to have you here. And especially after this extraordinary, congratulations, this amazing first feature, like?
Yes.
First
but not last.
Not inshallah. I think there are many questions on our minds, but perhaps beginning with you made your entire career since first in the early 1980s on documentary. What was specific? You have made films about Palestinian women, Lebanese women, children, etc. What about this particular story made you? You remember 2 or 3 years ago, you were still working on a script when you and I were in Oxford together. And maybe I asked you the same question. What about this particular story made you to opt for a feature story rather than a documentary?
Well, this story is based on a real story of a woman I met when I was shooting a film in Nablus, my hometown, during the first Intifada. And her story was, really affected me because she told me how she had a child in prison and how she raised it behind bars with the other prisoners. And that really made me think that this was a story that needed to be told. And since it took place in the 80s and the characters were no longer, they'd aged since then, and I knew I wouldn't have access to all of the characters, especially the Israeli guards, and the child had grown up by then. I felt it was time to do a fiction and make it a drama because it's so powerful as a story. And I didn't want to just talk about it, have the characters talk. I wanted to reenact it in the moment. And fiction gives you more possibilities, I think, in that sense, although I really love documentary as well, and I think it's also very creative. But this particular story I felt had to be told as a fiction.
It's, as everybody saw, the evidence that you come from a documentary background is evident in the way you shot that film. And also, your documentaries do not lack stories. They also have stories. The most remarkable aspect that I thought is, an entire film, interior. How did you manage? This is quite a feat of an achievement to do a film within this very enclosed environment. How did that work?
Well, it was a choice. I could have done flashbacks and other things, but I gradually was convinced that it would be more powerful to tell it within the confines. And I wanted people to feel as if they're in prison and there's no moment of, that we want to be with the characters, especially with Layal. And the whole film is based on her point of view. So that was an artistic choice from the beginning. And I think within that confines, you can tell the whole story. It's so powerful as a metaphor. The prison is just like occupation. You have everything within that prison,
No, it's quite evident. At what point did the story of this women prison inside the prison appear to be that you're really telling the story of Palestine? It's not just the story of a few Palestinians.
Yes, and it's one story from many. And I said that at the end.
Indeed. Did you have access to her? Was it important when you were writing?
Yes, of course. I based all my characters on real characters, and I spent many years actually researching. When Leila contacted me 5 years ago, I was working on it, so it took years of preparation and writing. I'm not a writer myself, but I ended up writing the script, and although I did try to work with scriptwriters, but it's so intimate in the end. It's very personal, and it's based on real stories. So
there is an aspect of being a filmmaker, first and foremost a filmmaker, then being a woman filmmaker, then being a Palestinian woman filmmaker. And many aspects of the film, as I was watching it, reminded me of the exquisite film of Mufida Talatli's
Yes.
Silence of the Palace.
Palaces.
And I wonder, in your own mind, as this film has now appeared, there is always a danger of too much ethnicizing it, making it specific. This is about Palestine. Well, it is about Palestine, but there is a universality in it, which is not, despite being Palestinian, it emerges from Palestinians. How does that work in your own mind as a filmmaker?
First of all, by focusing on a human story, it becomes universal. So it's not just a story about Palestine or just about women. It's about, people can relate to it as a story about justice and hope. And there's so many themes. So I feel it transcends Palestine, although of course it is about Palestine, but it touches people, I think, on those levels.
Mike, could you talk a little bit about the mechanics of the film? You shot it in Jordan, right?
I shot it in Jordan in a real prison. Very lucky to have had access to that military prison. And that gave it a lot of, I think, authenticity and credibility, and also helped the actors put them in the mood, really the psychological framework. It was tough, but important. It helped, definitely.
As you saw when we were all watching it, the film is also very funny. And for a Palestinian filmmaker to reach a point that to tell a story about really a not very funny story, but have the courage, imagination, and the moral audacity to be funny at the same time.
That's right. I think humor is really the height of our artistic expression. I wish there was more. Watching it now, I said I could have squeezed in a few more next time. Definitely. I think we should be funnier too. As Palestinians, our reality is so tough. It's important. It helps.
I don't know how many of you noticed, but there was a cameo of Anne-Marie Jasser there.
Yes. She was an Israeli inmate.
I think I don't want to monopolize the conversation. Anytime you feel to join the conversation, please come in. The obvious question is: I heard that the film was shown in Palestine. When?
Yes.
Where in Palestine was
it? Was
this
shown
film?
all over. It's still being shown in all the major towns and cities, West Bank, even Haifa, Nazareth, Jerusalem. It's being shown all the time now, for 3 months.
Are you happy in terms of its international reception? It was premiered in Toronto.
Yes, and Busan and London and many international film festivals.
And do you have a distributor? I'm just hoping that there is a distributor here.
I hope so too.
we are of course honored that Colombia is the place that the film is being premiered, but hopefully that other people get to see it. What might you hope or think or expect or envision will come out of this film?
What will come, well, I hope it'll be widely seen by ordinary people and not just festival goers, because I wanted to reach a wide audience around the world. So I'm working towards that. Hopefully North America will find the right distribution mechanism. I want to raise awareness, I'd like to touch people, to let them to feel this subject, because it's a forgotten, and the prisoners, there's not enough emphasis on or focus on what they're living through, especially the women and now the children. By the way, yesterday, I don't know if you read or heard, a 12-year-old girl was released after almost 3 months in prison. Yani, how can they arrest a 12-year-old girl? It's shocking. And, it's like just a news item. This is important to highlight.
That's another, I know the story of this 12-year-old kid who has been arrested. The related aspect of it to your film is, how do you make a film about an event which happened back, the Sabra Shatila massacre happened here, about past, when day-to-day daily news is actually identical or even worse? How do you see the relationship between the two?
Well, I put footage in the end to remind people that it's something that's ongoing, and it's not just a fiction from the past or something. Nothing has changed. If anything, it's worse than before. But I wanted to be very, very factual. That's why I didn't try to make that story today, because it wouldn't be exactly the same. You don't have the same kind of mix between political prisoners and common prisoners, Palestinians and Israelis. I thought that was fascinating too, to show, and even the moments of solidarity. Those things we never talk about when we don't even know about. So it was important to stick to the years. And also the huge prisoner exchange was very, 5,000 prisoners were released. It was very momentous. And also that those years were the time when the prisoner movement was developing. Everything was, they had to fight for everything they achieved.
Mike, could you talk about, yes, please, there's a microphone here, you can join us whenever you want. Could you talk a little bit, one of the earliest pictures of you that we have seen is you behind a huge old-fashioned camera. How has the change in technology and digital camera and the increase in visibility and so forth affected your sense of cinema?
It's changed Palestinian cinema, because now cameras are accessible to anyone can make a film. That's why there's so much creative expression coming out of Palestine. For me, I started with film, a 16 millimeter, and then it was difficult to go to video after that because film is so artistic, but we try with video to bring the same emotion, and now the cameras are more closer to the quality of 16 millimeter or film cinema. But it doesn't matter really what camera I'm using. It's the eye that's behind it, and the mind, and the heart, and the passion. So it's not really about technology. It's about the feeling.
One of the signature essays of our late colleague Edward Said is permission to narrate. About have you ever felt you need permission to narrate?
Permission from the people?
From anybody.
Yeah, definitely. Not permission, but to feel part of that. I'm not stealing stories, that I'm giving something back. Especially with documentary, there's a huge ethical responsibility of making a difference and not just taking the images and running, off and becoming famous or something. That's not. I do feel there's a responsibility. Same thing with fiction. That's why it was important for me to show it in Palestine, especially to the prisoners, and to see how they felt about their story being told.
Could you be with the film when it was shown in Palestine?
Yes, of course. I was there at Ramallah and Nablus. I spent a long time showing it to even prisoners and ordinary Palestinians.
Prisoners inside prison? Or?
No, of course. Released prisoners, liberated prisoners.
Into the bigger prison. Question, comment, please join us. Please, sir. Please.
Just one quick question. She got the 2 letters, and was there a translation?
Oh, there was no translation? You know something? This version is not I think there's a problem with the subtitles in this version. I can explain the letters.
And then I have a second question, which was just, there was no religion in the prison.
Okay.
I'm just wondering about that.
Yeah, now I'm a bit upset that the subtitles didn't appear on this, because this is a Blu-ray. It's not the final. I have to go check what's wrong. But in the first letter, and you missed something important by not having the subtitles, you hear the voice. He's saying that, for those who understand Arabic, that the men have joined the strike with the women. Tell your friend, the women, that the men, that we've joined the strike. That's the first letter. The second letter is very important because it says that news that 6 Israeli soldiers are being captured, and they're talking about a prisoner exchange. And then he says something really touching. He said, "I'll wait for you forever, Ayman." So that's very important. So we know there's hope for her too, after her husband was not up to the. And most of the women, Palestinian prisoners, they end up marrying former prisoners themselves, because those are the people, the men who understand the most.
Yes, please. Please.
Two questions. One is about, I guess, the transition to narrative. What made you want to go to narrative? What skills from documentary were useful in narrative or not useful? And how does narrative get at certain things that documentary maybe can't? Or how to see a narrative as a kind of documentary, to see a narrative film as sort of a documentary. That's one. Second question is about prisons in general. We have in the United States this kind of movement, like that prison is not just really a place for criminals, actually a political thing. Because in the United States you have the new Jim Crow and prison as this way of basically as a racial system of basically segregation and in the United States. And then also even in places like Syria, the prison becomes a place where people organize. Because so many people are in jail for political reasons, that it becomes a place of organization. So that's obviously true in Palestine. I know it's true in Syria, and it's a thing in the United States, a political issue around race. So I was just thinking about what your thoughts are on prisons and prison as a political space and a space of political activism, as we saw with the strike in the movie.
Okay, thanks. The transition for me, it's like a natural progression. There's a continuation for me, a documentary to fiction, and in my fiction there's a lot of documentary. A lot of it is all of it almost is handheld. I wanted to give that feeling of cinema verite, style. And in my documentaries, there's a lot of also narrative. There's always stories and characters, and they're character-driven. So to me, they feed into each other. What was more about the documentary?
The second was about the question of prison
Prisons,
as a
okay.
political
yeah,
space.
But I think you asked more questions about the first one.
Yeah, like about what skills does it play?
I'll tell you an important skill. Okay. Working with children. From my documentaries, because most of my documentaries focus on children, I really enjoy working with children, even though it's very challenging. So from my documentary background, I was able to work with a child of 2 years old, because you can't really direct a child that age. And I say that it's the child that directs you, So it's like you have to deal with in scenes like that as a documentary and not as fiction. You can't tell the child what to say. You have to capture the moment, and you have to capture the spontaneity and all that. So that's very much documentary, not really fiction. But it's there's not really a barrier there. So. Plus, I worked with some non-actors, even though a lot of them are well-known, but a few of them were acting for the first time. So with those, documentary skills also came in hand. To the prison question, definitely. I mean, prison is a space for political, organization, for education, more than even. It's a place where people develop too. It's not just, it's a lot of these, a lot of prisoners in the Palestinian case, especially, they learned by being together, they organized their time to study, to discuss, to intermix, because, there are a lot of different political groups were in the same space. And even in the case of the women's prison, because there were Palestinians and Israelis, I think that also was interesting in what it created, and what, that also creates awareness. And I think, the Palestinians were demanding always the women to be separated from the ordinary criminals, But in the end, they were separated for a different reason. I think I feel, my analysis is that the authorities, the prison directors, felt that the danger maybe of combining political prisoners with ordinary prisoners, of the effect that could have on the Israeli prisoners. So maybe that was one of the reasons they separated them. So that's another interesting aspect. There are many, many things. I mean, prison is such a symbol of Palestinian, of the condition of Palestinian people, or the metaphor. So there's a lot to be said on that level. No religion in prison, because in the 80s and the 70s and the 60s, it wasn't an issue. And then a lot of them were, it was mixed. There were Christians, there were Muslims, there were Jews. You know, it wasn't important. It was the politics or the national cause that was, it was not, there was not as, religion didn't factor like it does today. And neither, like all the problems and divisions did not exist in the same way as they do today.
Yes.
Still choked up a little bit. That was absolutely beautiful. First of all, I want to congratulate you. I've known Maine for a while. Noud is an old friend, and it really touched me that Noud was the name of the son as well. You mentioned that May is a woman and a Palestinian woman and a movie director, but you didn't mention that she's a mother, and I think that that is a very raw emotion that came through to everyone, really. And I was wondering if you could, like, being a Lebanese woman in New York City, it's funny. My parents always tell me, like, don't post this, don't post that, you know, like, we live in constant fear, you know, about who we are and where we come from, and I can't imagine for Palestinians with this ongoing thing up until today. I admire that you've encouraged your daughters so much to be loud about this here, because it's so necessary, and where a lot of us live in this fear to even talk about it in this community, because especially New York City, right, and the ideologies, and my current thesis is on media and how that has shaped the way people think in North America, and, you know, generation through generation, created biases. I think that through art and movie we have an opportunity to change that over time, and I think the relationship that was built between the Israeli drug addict prisoner and Layal really touched me the most, because I think for a brighter future, that's going to be so necessary, and it's going to take many shapes and forms in order to create an impact. I was wondering how you see that translating for the younger generation, you know, for the people who are capable to read and to empathize, but often incapable to put themselves in another perspective. How do you think that can translate, and what can we do to reach the people who really should and could be most impacted by this kind of message? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Wow, it's a big question. Yeah, I was very touched by the relationship between Layal and Shulamit, and that's why I included it. And I also wanted to pay homage to the lawyers, the human rights, the Israeli human rights lawyers who have defended Palestinians for years. And there are many of them, and many are women. So I wanted to show that. And I hope the film will be seen by more Israelis. Some have already seen it. And because those are the people I also want to touch, to create some kind of awareness or discussion on an important subject. And I think art, like you said, and cinema and film is a very powerful medium for touching people and making them, you know, really making them think about these important subjects. And I hope I feel that this is what I can do, but I also think that everyone can do something in their field and should, and be more engaged, especially the younger generation. All of us.
Tomorrow you will have a master class with Mira Nair, and you'll talk about your filmmaking techniques. But I wonder if I could ask you tonight, talk a little bit about how scripted was your film? How did you allow for any time, or did you need any improvisatory things to do while you were on location, or did you just storyboarded and you did as you planned?
I had a script, of course, that developed and changed, and to the last minute, I was driving them crazy because I kept changing the script because I felt I had to condense it, and some scenes, like if I had 3 or 4 scenes, I'd make them one scene because time was limited, And I felt it would be stronger, and I was eliminating unnecessary scenes. Even outside the prison, I had several scenes that I had planned to shoot outside the prison. Then I realized that they weren't that important, so I was making choices. And even during the shooting, I was, if I felt something was developing outside the script, I would let it happen. You know, that's where documentary comes in handy. That I'm not, I'm not rigid. You know, I'm flexible. I can manage, you know, adapt, and it's important. A script should be living. It shouldn't be something just that's done and that you apply. You should, you know, things develop. There's a dynamic between the actors, and some of them are really good in improvisation. I encourage that, but to the benefit of the script, of course, not something tangent.
What was the impact of this film on you as a filmmaker? At the end of it, did you think, darn, I should have started making narrative films earlier, or are you going to go back to making documentaries? How did you emerge from this experience?
Strong, because it was tough and really hard for many reasons, and especially the subject being so sensitive. It's such a subject that touches, for Palestinians, you can't afford to make any mistakes in the subject like this. I feel that I made it at the right time for me.
In what way? Could you be?
I mean, I think professionally and experience-wise, and in many ways, this was the right time to do this kind of film. And I love documentary, but I mean, I'm open now to documentary and fiction, but I have several fiction projects. I think I think it's powerful as a medium, of course, you know, definitely.
Yes, please, ma'am.
First of all, I congratulate you. I mean, this is a very touching movie, and I'm glad I was able to see it. My question is very simple, maybe not to you. To me, how did you manage to get access, was it difficult? How did the Israelis give you permission to go in, knowing the subject of the movie? I'm sure, I mean, I would like to know the logistics behind it.
Okay.
Thank you.
This film was shot in Jordan, in a Jordanian military prison. And the actors are all Palestinians, Jordanians. But I've made films, of course, in the West Bank. I've made in Lebanon. I mean, my first film was in 1982 during the siege of Beirut. Anyone who survives that can survive anything afterwards. And I'm serious about it. And the second important learning experience was shooting during the first Intifada in Palestine, in Nablus, under siege, and running and hiding and clandestine. Also, this really gave me a lot of strength. So, you know, it's making films on the front line, really. But in the end, it's what you say. It's not So this film, in that sense, I didn't have to face any, you know, they didn't stop me because I didn't shoot it in Palestine. It's difficult to shoot a film like this over there. I had planned to, but I had access to a real prison, so I couldn't resist.
Please, ma'am.
So I just want to say that I'm almost at a loss for words because of the power of the film. I spent a lot of time in prison in the United States, and I think that this film so captures a special culture of women in prison. And it's really amazing to me to see the similarities. There's certainly differences. The political reality is very different, and as we know, but to see the culture among the women in which there is both laughter and celebrating and emotionally embracing each other, and the culture of being a mother is so critical. And I think that, you know, the prison that I was at, 75% of the women were mothers. And so that identity and that culture, and there was also a nursery, and women could keep their children up to 12 months normally, and then the child would have to go. So that separation happened, and many women were not accepted in the nursery, and so they had to say goodbye to their child from the hospital. But what so visually was so powerful was, being handcuffed when you're giving delivery, or being handcuffed when you're going into labor. In New York State, that has been the practice. Most people don't realize that. But only in 2015, 1 year ago, the Governor Cuomo, after a lot of agitation by women, signed a law saying that women can no longer be shackled when they're going into labor, being transported in the ambulance, when they're delivering. And so to see that happening there, and to know that this is still happening in many parts of the country, in this country. And as I was watching the film, I was just thinking how wonderful it would be if the women in prison here could see that film. And I don't think it's impossible, so it's something that I'd like to talk about. I think it would be just a fantastic connection that could be made, and thank you so much for making the film.
Thank you.
I work with the Center for Justice here with other people that are here, Geraldine Downey and Cameron, and I just feel like we're really honored to make that connection between what's happening in Palestine and what's happening in this country, which is a carceral environment. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you. I would love for my film to be shown to women prisoners here. That's a wonderful idea. Thank you.
This is an incredible, incredible film. And it's not a matter of congratulating you. It is your bravery to be able to make this film is really, really unbelievable. I have one suggestion. Please have a copy of this shown to Hillary Clinton because she loves Israel and especially Netanyahu so much that I think she might get a kick out of this.
Thank you. Good idea.
Please, sir.
Meet Elf Shukr. I want to congratulate you and thank you. You touched me in ways, even though I'm not a woman, but just to give you a little history.
Nobody's perfect, that's okay.
My uncle, my uncle, as my father's brother, was tortured to the point where when he was released in Palestine, he was so ill that he died like a few months. So I have experienced that through my father. My father did go to jail, but not like my uncle. My son recently went to jail in Canada. So I relived all that pain during the movie. So I want to thank you. I want to ask you a specific question about vilifying the guard, the Israeli guard. Of course, I felt you held back because I know the stories there. I heard recently in a screening by, it was actually a play, my wife corrected me. I thought it was a movie. It was Field of Dreams by Jen Marlowe. Jen? Yeah, and the question was, well, actually, one of the characters was so, the word that I'm trying to remember is, help me out, Debbie. It was, it's what describes that guard. It's some kind of cynicism or, anyway, I'm lost for words. But, pardon? No, it wasn't sadistic. It was that smirk. It was a smirky attitude that I lived actually as a youngster in Jerusalem, witnessing from anyone behind the gun, you know, would show you this. I am 10 times better than you. Did you over-characterize the guard? I mean, were there any criticisms about that, the way she exhibited that rudeness and evil. Anyway, that's the question. I don't know if it's a question.
Yeah. You know, I haven't had many criticisms. Actually, the guard you're talking about, she's from Yafa. Her name's Abir Haddad. And she's representing the film now in Sweden. She's very proud of her role. And she, out of that role, the guard, it wasn't a major role. She made it into a major role because she really got into character. It's interesting with the actors. With the Israeli actor Ze'eva, for instance, she's a fascinating character. It's the first time she acts in front of the camera. She's actually Palestinian from Akka. Her brother was in that prison, Ramle prison, for 15 years. So she spent her whole childhood visiting him as a child in real life. So when we came to film, she actually broke down that day in prison. She couldn't stand prisons. She had the trauma, but she loved her role as Ze'eva because it was the opposite of her real life story. And it was a kind of therapy for her. And she loved cursing and being Ze'eva. She just loves it. And now she calls herself Ze'eva, Safaha, Ze'eva Safaha, Ze'eva the killer or whatever. She's so funny. I love them all. They're great.
Please.
Hi, that was so powerful and emotional, and thank you for making it. Whatever you had to go through to make that happen, thank you. My question is, obviously you're an amazing storyteller, and you had mentioned working with the young actors, like doing documentary style, but I'm wondering how you worked with the other actors, and if they had done film before, and just what your process was with directing.
Yes, thank you. I mean, some of the actors are well known. Maysa Abdelhadi, who played Layal, was a real. I mean, this was the biggest role she's had. It was great because she was really. She really got into the character, and they all did. I don't know if I mentioned Hannah is my daughter, that I introduced you to. So Hannah played the role of a prisoner. Noor, who's there, also played the role of the guard. With Hannah, it was raw emotion because she doesn't. Now she's studying acting, but she acts from emotion, you know. So it was devastating. The scene when her sister dies, we were all crying, you know, and she was really. It was so hard because she was really living it. With the child, it's interesting too. You talk about actors. For instance, now, after the film, he's very marked by that experience. He loves the idea of prison because he used to go and have fun. And he keeps talking about the bird. His parents were saying all he talks about is a bird, and he draws all over all the walls in the house. So they didn't understand why till they saw the film.
Thank you so much for telling that story. I'm a bit too short. One of the main themes in the film is the role of women in the struggle. And my question is whether you think the fact that the prison was an all-female space allowed the women to take a more dominant role. I mean, a striking example is that they led the strike. And if not, then how do you see that transcend beyond the bars and currently as well?
The role of women, yeah. Good question, because, I mean, Palestinian women are really at the forefront in many ways. And the prison experience is very interesting, and in the 80s and 70s and 80s in particular, because they were quite, I mean, the leaders of the women's movement went through prison. And same thing today, you have important, you know, we even have an MP in prison, you know. It's, so prison was an important experience for developing the Palestinian women's movement. And they did lead strikes. In that case, in the prisons, they were, in that particular strike, the men followed the women. The women are playing a big role, of course, but still there's a lot to be achieved. It's not, you know, laws and all that haven't changed to support the rights of women enough. But they are very prominent and very active, especially in civil society and NGOs and civil resistance. That resistance is an important word because that's the only, the only thing that, for Palestinians, it's an important thing to resist in any, especially civil resistance is very important, and the women are at the forefront of that.
Okay. If no more question, all on behalf of my colleagues at Columbia, I'd like to thank you for graciously accepting our
Thank you. Thank you.
invitation.